Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast, your weekly look inside the world of fly fishing presented by Pete Tigers. If you're enjoying listening, please consider subscribing.
Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. It's that time of year. You're on the river, it's cold, but the temperature comes up just a degree or two. That's just enough for just the briefest little hatch, perhaps of midges, perhaps even some olives. As you look upstream, you see a fish rise, then another one. There's bubbles in the rise. It must be grayling. My guest today, James Waine, enjoys tackling grayling with dry flies, so I get to talk to him about what this means to him and how much he loves it. Also tackling trout on dry flies as well. It is one of the great things about running this magazine that I get to talk to so many people, and James has recently submitted a piece that's going to appear in a future edition of Fly Culture too. So I'm really looking forward to putting that out for you to get to read as well. But I hope you enjoy this chat. James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me. Brilliant, thanks. I was telling a friend that I was coming on to the podcast this morning, and first thing he said was, "Well, has he heard your voice? They're going to have to put subtitles on it." So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it's not too much work for you. But thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. And like I'd said in the introduction, this is the wonderful thing about the magazine and the podcast and everything else, is that I get to talk to so many people, and you're going to be a contributor in a forthcoming edition of Fly Culture. And we just got chatting there, and it's lovely to hear people's stories and for listeners to get a chance of hearing those as well. And there's some really interesting stuff to talk about, which I'm really, really looking forward to as well. So thank you for that. But are you getting out fishing? Are you doing some fishing right now?
Yeah, I don't think I wasn't out yesterday, but I was out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I think. I'm not sure if I'll get out today, but I've got some fishing with a friend booked tomorrow. Get out while the weather's good, while the river levels are good. Get out as much as I can.
That sounds the right way to do it as well, doesn't it? And
absolutely.
It looks today. I've been this morning when we were recording this one. I've been out, and it looks as though it's going to be a beautiful day. And it's one of those days that you think, "Oh, I wonder if." And yeah, there's lots of those hopefully to look forward to. Although I know we've got some rain coming where we are back end of the week. But just to give people context, and I know you mentioned your accent, which probably gives a little bit of a clue to things. But where would you consider home water for you, and where do you tend to do a lot of your fishing?
So I would say my home river is the River Tees. Middle to upper Tees is where I do most of my fishing. I also fish the Eden quite a lot, and basically any river in the area. You've got the Swale and all the tributaries of the Tees as well. The Skern and the Loon and all those types of things. So they're my home waters. I do obviously travel around. I like to fish new places. But in terms of a home river, it's the Tees, and the Tees system, I would say, is the main one.
I've been very fortunate to fish the Tees at Woodencroft there, which is just upstream of Barnard Castle, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful stream, isn't it? It's really, and right up in the moor there as well. And it's a really fabulous stream to fish. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think I fished it 2 or 3 times and really loved it. How would you describe it to somebody listening who's not been there?
It's quite strange. So the river itself, I think, if we look at the Tees as a whole, it's split into three areas really. You've got obviously the lower, the middle, and the upper. The lower is what you would maybe consider your classic sort of coarse angling areas. We get a lot of pike in the lower reaches. It's a lot slower, deeper, that kind of thing. The middle, I'll go to the upper first. The upper is right at the top. You've got sort of pocket water. It's quite fast flowing. And then as you get down towards the middle, it's kind of a blend between the two. So it's almost a perfect habitat for a lot of the game species that we go for. So a lot of places I like to fish in the middle tees, you can have whatever you want. So you can have pocket water, and then a few hundred yards downstream, you've got nice pools to fish in and that kind of thing. So I think it's quite varied, but it's a pretty magical place to fish, I think, and I don't think sometimes it gets the recognition that it always deserves, because I mean, I've had some incredible fish out of there, but it's never talked about when people talk about your big fish waters or anything like that. They never think, the River Tees. But yeah, it's quite unique. It's got the dark peat stained waters, and it's a long way away from like a chalk stream, for example. It's quite different. Wading wise, a lot of people struggle with wading on the tees. It can be very bouldery, quite slippery, that kind of thing. Even compared to other local rivers, like the Swale, for example, is very easy to wade. It's all nice and gravel, and but yeah, the Tees is one of the toughest wading rivers I think you'll find. But it's good fun.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Swale, and I remember seeing that. I've not fished it, but I've driven over it a number of times, probably to fish the Ewer or the Tees.
Yeah.
And it was that, if I had to probably describe a Freestone River in the limited amount that I've seen, that's a really great example of it. And you come on to the Tees, like you say, and it can be a little bit leery to wade in. There's some pretty deep holes there as well, isn't there? So I guess that's where some of those big fish can go hide out in. And you mentioned pocket water, and that kind of made me think of that upper water. And my friend Darren Sadler, who's been a guest on here, when we fished on my home water together, he said, we got to go fish the upper water. He said it's a bit like Dartmoor, but super wide. Pocket water heaven, as far as I'm concerned, on that upper part of the river, isn't it? It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's somewhere I've always tried to find somewhere else quite like it, and I just never have been able to. It's probably one of my favourite places to fish. It's the fishing itself isn't particularly difficult. Like we go up quite regularly, and they'll take a dry fly pretty much all season, and it's just fun. The fish aren't big, but in those fast riffles and pocket water, they feel a lot bigger, and they are truly wild as well. So yeah, it's a pretty amazing place to fish. I mean, the weather can be pretty brutal up there. You quite often have quite a strong wind to contend with. More often than not, it's downstream as well. So yeah, I've been up there days where you're trying to cast your fly up and it just won't land on the water. So yeah, it's fun. It's a challenge, but it's something special.
Yeah. I remember fishing that upper section with the duo of dries, actually, which was fantastic fun. And like you say, may not be some of the biggest fish. I'm sure there's some lurking in there, but was just, for me, as a fan of pocket water, like you say, I can't, off the top of my head, think of, certainly in the UK, anywhere as similar. My obvious comparison would be Dartmoor, but the river's so much wider there where you are.
Yeah.
Which made it really, really interesting to fish as well, and the drag-free drift and everything that came with that as well was fun to try and get to terms with. But I wanted to, we're going to talk about, and this conversation, the email conversation started about you talking about your passion for, or we got talking about grayling on dry flies and your passion of catching grayling on dry flies. But before that, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper and get a sense of you as a fly angler. And have you been a lifelong angler? Is it something that's always been in your life?
Yes and no. I think I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and my grandparents took me to Kielder Water, and they'd always been quite keen on fishing. My grandfather had done a bit of fly fishing, but he wasn't an avid fly angler. What they did a lot was with a bubble float and worms. So that was my first introduction. They took me up there, and I caught a couple of fish, and yeah, it was pretty surreal just to feel the fish pulling on the rod was pretty amazing. So we did that, quite a few times. Most summers for a couple of years, they would take my brother and I up there, and we'd catch some fish, and my brother would end up sort of with a bird's nest in his reel, and he never took it on. But for me, it kind of, from the age of about 14 or 15, I didn't really continue fishing. I think other things took over. I was a big golfer at the time, and I think it just sort of lay dormant for a while. And then I went to college and university, that kind of thing, and it was always there because whenever I would go, if I had to do a train journey or if I was on a flight somewhere, I'd go to the shop and I'd buy a trout fisherman or fly tying, fly fishing, something like that. Even though I hadn't picked up a rod for a number of years and I hadn't actually really done any fly fishing at that point, it was always there. So I'd be reading these magazines and I'd keep thinking to myself, I need to, I'm going to have to give this a proper go. And then eventually I must have been 19, 20-year-old, something like that. And I kind of took the plunge. I bought myself a little outfit, like an all-in-one thing. I couldn't remember what brand it was. It was one of those where you get a rod, you get a bag, you get a reel, a line, a box of flies. The box of flies, I think, were cat's whiskers lures. So then I headed off to this local still water, and I'm thrashing the water, and this guy comes up to me and says, "Are you, you're just getting into it? Are you quite new to this?" And for some reason, I said, "Oh no, I come all the time." And he could obviously see there I am thrashing the water, not having a clue what I'm doing, and I snapped the rod through bad casting. The fly didn't hit it. I don't know what happened. So the rod snapped about 6 inches from the tip. And I thought, well, this is no good. I need to find some help somewhere. So I was furiously searching through Google. So this would have been about 2009, 2010. So YouTube was obviously there, but it wasn't the resource that it is now. And I stumbled across a forum, and forums were not something I'd seen before. I didn't really know what they were, how they worked. And I started scrolling through the pages on this forum, and like some of the people, you could feel the knowledge almost coming through the screen. And it was pretty remarkable. So I joined up to this forum and I started asking some ridiculous questions about, what does this mean? What does that, can anyone tell me this? And then it just kind of went from there. I met a couple of guys, and then I started fishing on the river. I didn't really touch still waters again. I think I always knew that the river was where I wanted to be. So I was looking I found a couple of guys that were happy to take me out. And it was, when I look back now, we were pretty limited. We were all quite new, and we were fishing downstream nymphs down and across. And it was, it was fun. We were catching a few fish, just basically concentrating on the little riffles and just swinging these nymphs down, and we caught a few fish, generally quite small. and then it just kind of went from there. I read a bit about North Country spiders and how, for the river tees, really I should be fishing them. So I gave those a go. And then it just evolved from there. And then it was very much over the last sort of 10 years, I've learned just through being on the water as much as I can, learning about the behavior of the fish, learning about the fly life, learning about how the weather and the water conditions can affect things, just through my own experiences. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that is an unconventional fly fishing upbringing, but yeah, that's how it was for me.
It sort of kind of sounds like a fast track in some respects, that, traditionally the small still waters were a place where you sort of kind of learnt your trade a little bit, and then possibly went onto reservoirs and then rivers, or rivers and reservoirs. But it looks as though you went that way. Was that a function of the people you were hanging out with, that they were more river biased and that took you that way?
Yeah, I think that must have been it. I was quite fortunate, because around the time when I was very very early into fly fishing and I bought that first setup, my uncle had actually built his own fishery. He owns a, it was a farm and it had plenty of land on it, and he decided to dig some lakes out. But he'd filled it initially with carp and roach and different types of coarse fish. And I'd had a little go for those, with stick floats. I think I don't. It's not something I'm very familiar with, and I knew pretty quickly that wasn't for me. And then he'd only done that for a couple of years, and then he decided to take them out and stock it with trout. So I did fish that a little bit, because it's nice to have somewhere to fish for free. So I would fish that a bit, and I think I used that a little bit to work on my casting, how to play a fish, that kind of thing. But yeah, pretty much a lot of the people that I knew from my early fishing days were river anglers. So maybe it was just by chance that was the case, and that's obviously the way that I went.
It's interesting you talk about the casting and refining your casting, which of course makes life much easier and your ability to cover fish. And the interesting thing was that you mentioned golf there as well. And I often think that there's parallels between golf and casting, but obviously breaking your rod, perhaps that isn't the case then early on, or if that says something about the golfing skills, but they've obviously changed a bit over time. But do you now look back and think actually there is some sort of a parallel universe between the two, in the sense of using the club and using the rod and not needing to put in so much power and everything else?
I think 100% yes, because one of the problems I've always had with my golf swing is that it's too fast. So I'll bring the club up behind me and I'll whip it back down like ridiculous speeds, and there's no pause in between. And I remember when I was younger, I'd have golf lessons, and they'd always say the same, like, I've never seen a golf swing that fast. Like, it's not sustainable, type of thing. And that's what I was doing with my casting. I wasn't timing it. So I think that's probably how I snapped that rod, because I was starting the back cast, and before I'd even got halfway through the back cast, I'm driving it forward at the speed of light. And this little cheap rod that I'd bought obviously couldn't handle it. And I was obviously following through too far as well, and that's why I was slapping the water. So yeah, it's still something I have to tell myself now. Just slow it down. I don't know whether it's excitement or what it is. I just get a bit carried away. But yeah, I'm not a great caster by any stretch of the imagination. I can be quite inventive. I would say anything, within 30, 40 feet, I know I can cover it. I can land it where I want, and I can I can manipulate the fly and the line to do what I want. But, I'll never be one of these who can go out on a reservoir and, a 90-foot cast to a target. Just no.
And I think as well, as a river angler, there's not a need to be able to do that. It's nice to have in the armory if you want it. But you talked there about having lessons for golf. So you talked about the casting. Did you go down that route with the casting as well? Did you get some tuition, or did you sort of kind of figure it out as you went along? And YouTube, you said, was coming in then, and of course we started to see videos appearing to help people with their casting. What route did you go other than practicing at your uncle's fishery? Was there a route where you decided, yes, my casting needs some work, how am I going to work on that? Or you just learned on the job, as it were?
Yeah, I pretty much just learned as I went. I've never had any kind of tuition or anything for fishing. If I was to advise someone now, I would say that you should, certainly. For whatever reason, I decided that I didn't need to, or I didn't want to. But what I used to do quite often was I'd set up a camera on my phone or whatever, and I'd record myself doing these casts. Because quite often I would feel that I was getting it right, and obviously the result wasn't. And I was looking at it thinking, well, that felt right. What's going on? And so I'd watch the video back, and I was bringing my back casts, almost back parallel to the ground, or I wasn't even bringing it to my ear or whatever. So yeah, that was pretty much what I did. I just kept plugging away at it. I was never really one to go and practice on grass or anything either. I just did it while I was fishing. Again, I would say if you're paying for tickets and whatever, then that's not advisable. But for me, obviously, I was quite lucky that I had somewhere that I could effectively practice for free with the small chance of a fish at the end of it. So yeah, that's the way I did it.
And that's a really cool tip, isn't it? Videoing your casting. And even here's something to think about if you're relatively new, is that when you're in a fishing environment as well, don't say, well, that was a good cast. Try and figure out why the bad cast went wrong and what was causing it. And if you can focus on that, then I think that helps you improve, so you understand. You're not hoping it's going out. You know that's a good cast, but also if you know why it's a bad cast, hopefully you're able to put it out and put it right. Sorry. And like you say, James, that having tuition definitely helps. And even if you don't want to go down that route, there's so much information out there to help you, and it will allow you to become a better angler as well, because you'll be able to cover water no matter where you're fishing more efficiently. And I always work on the basis that the quicker I can cover a fish, the less chance it's going to be spooked, so there's more chance I'm going to catch it. So they're things I kind of still think about this far down the journey. But so you've talked that the journey really went quite rapidly towards rivers because of the people that you're fishing with. Really where we're circling with this is a dry flies for grayling. So you said, you were swinging nymphs down and across, and you were then moving on to spiders. What took you the other way and got you looking up the river the other way?
Yeah,
And like you say, sorry, there's such a rich history, and we discuss the swale that lends itself. You can see where North Country spiders and everything else has come from. So yeah, what was it, given that where you are, your location, but also how you stood in the river and how you went from swinging downstream to what I guess is probably throwing a dry upstream?
It was pretty much that, as you do, you get down to the river on a good day and you see rising fish. So I was watching these rising fish, and the first time I'd seen them, I was thinking, well, my casting isn't good enough, which is why I was doing a lot of the downstream stuff, because I could just flick it across and let it swing. And that's what really prompted me to practice on my casting, because I was looking at these fish rising, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing to see it, to see the fish take your fly? And then, the next week or whatever, I saw this guy who was fishing wet flies, but he was stood in this pool, and there was rising fish everywhere. And this guy was swinging spiders or wet fly. I couldn't tell what they were, but he was definitely swinging wet stuff down and across. And I looked at it and I thought, that's not right. That can't be right. So I went away and I practiced a bit more, and by now I was getting into fly tying as well. So I tied up a few flies that I wouldn't dream of putting in my box now. And I went back and I found these fish, and yeah, I just kept plugging away, and then eventually one of them took one of my flies, and that was pretty much it. It was that, just seeing everything unfold, and that, I think it's the anticipation as well, as your fly is drifting down towards the area that you've seen the fish rising, and then just seeing this mouth open up around it. Yeah, it's quite bizarre. It's obviously, I don't need to explain it to you, but when you try and explain it to anyone that doesn't fish, they will never understand it until they've experienced it. There is nothing that you can say that will sort of explain how incredible it feels. And that was it. It was that feeling that just did it for me. And then from then on, it was pretty much right. I'm done. I'm done with the spiders. I'm done with the nymphs. Dries all the way. And it's been pretty much that ever since.
Nice. And what was that first pattern? What was the one that triggered this passion for dry flies?
It was, I guess you would call it, some kind of olive imitation. It was pretty basic. I'm not even sure if it had a tail. Now I think back, it was just an olive thread and then a hackle wound around the front, which was, too big and not stiff enough. But I put plenty of gink or muslin or whatever on it, and it worked. So I think I must have been quite lucky that it wasn't a fussy fish, and it was quite early in the season as well. So it gave me a chance.
Sounds like you matched the large dark olive hatch perfectly.
Yes. Yeah, accidentally, I'm sure, at the time.
And was it, you said you started fly tying. Were you, and you said you were learning about entomology, and, I've said on here previously before that I think we owe it to the fish to have at least a basic understanding. Were they going hand in hand, the fly tying and the entomology as well?
Yeah, 100%. Because what I'd found pretty quickly with shot-bought flies was that they weren't, there was little tweaks that you would want to make to them. So I would look at a pattern and I think, well, that doesn't quite match what I'm seeing on the river. I would like this to be a bit longer, or I would like this to float a bit better, or I would like this to sink a bit more, whatever it was. So then, yeah, it just kind of evolved from there. As the more I learned about the entomology and when the hatches were and what they were, and how they looked, and it was even down to things like how they can vary between, from river to river or area to area. Things like your sherry spinners, for example, they can come in a vast array of different colours, really. So yeah, it was just things like that, and I made it a bit of a mission to get good, in inverted commas, at fly tying, so that I was able to replicate what I was seeing, and make the flies work, because shot bought flies, again, quite often they're not the best quality. They'll unravel after a fish, or they won't float very well. So yeah, it was just about having something that I could rely on, and then again that just escalated from there, really.
Wonderful. And I didn't ask you, was it a trout or a grayling that grabbed that first dry fly for you?
It was a trout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then that was it, was it? It was, you were predominantly then just fishing dry flies, or was it just exclusively you were just dry fly from there?
I wouldn't say it's exclusively dry fly, but it is. I mean, it's it must be 95% of my fishing now. I'm quite fortunate. I live close to the river, so these days, now that I know what I'm doing, I can go out and I'll know on an April day where the river's just waking up. I'll know that the LDOs will come on somewhere between 11:30 and 1 o'clock, so I can head down to the river. I'll have my, again in inverted commas, perfectly imitated flies, and I'll go and sit on a pool, and I'll just wait, and I'll know what to expect. And then when you see those first few trickling down, and you just get that little excitement building up, and you think, right, where's this first fish going to be? Is it going to be at the top end? Is it going to be in the middle? And then you see that first LDO get snatched from the surface, and there you go, you're away.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And again, we've talked on the podcast for listeners about the patience involved and how that. And I understand, that years back that when I hit the river, I'd be running down there and thrashing it to a foam. But just that, as you say there, perfectly waiting for the river to unfold and tell you the secrets. But there aren't really secrets, are they? If you're patient enough, it tells you everything that you need to know, that the hatch, where the fish are in the water column, what they're eating in that hatch, and all of those clues are there just by taking a little bit of time to be patient. And it really does pay off, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the one thing that, again, quite a lot of people ask me now. How do you do it? What can you give me any advice? Any of that kind of thing. And I think patience is probably top of the list, because early season, middle of April or whatever, you're not going to be fishing all day. It's just not worth it. If you're a dry fly fisherman, certainly, the hatch is going to be limited to maybe an hour late morning, lunchtime sort of thing. So you want to pick your time, and you just want to wait and see what the river's doing. In my earlier days, I would be the person that went down there, and I'd be there all day, and I'd just be, popping flies here, there, and everywhere, and thinking, why is nothing coming up to take this? But then you get to learn about what's going on with the river. And I think, it's something that a lot of people do is, they just, as soon as they see a rise, they just dive in the river and start casting to it. And then you think, well, you've just waded through that pool and spooked another 24 fish. So yeah, it's just about biding your time and thinking about how to approach the water, and then thinking about your cast, thinking about your angles and your drift and all that kind of thing, and just being methodical, I guess, is the best way of describing it. So yeah, that's my approach anyway.
That makes perfect sense. And I almost go to the stage where I play it out in my mind, so I know the fish's how am I going to set, if there's a tree there, how am I going to do this, how am I going to do that, and then you're sort of kind of prepared. So if you are lucky enough that the fish comes up and eats the fly, it's almost foregone conclusions are wrong term, but it was going to happen. You know what you're going to do, so it's not like it was a random act of luck, is it? That it is something that you've planned for, and that's how I kind of try and think it through in my mind, I think. But what I wanted to ask you, I was going to say, because we're circling around grayling on dries, but listening to you talk about it, would it be fair to say that grayling fill the gap that when you can't fish for trout, and trout fill the gap when you can't fish for grayling. Would that be fair, or is there one that you do have that little bit more love for? And if you do, which one and why?
I think. Well, I don't think I know. I know trout for me are the number one. I think the reason is probably just because I think they're a bit more difficult. You can get a good day where it feels quite easy, but in general terms, they can be a lot more difficult to fish for. Certainly, if if you're going out and looking for a specimen fish or something like that, if you're fishing for grayling, I find pretty much as long as you get your drift right, they're happy. They're not. They're not as spooky. They're easier to find at times. But yeah, I would say trout definitely. There's just something about trout. I don't think I'll ever get bored of fishing for trout. The variation you get, even in the same river, the same pool, you can get 3 or 4 trout out, and each one will look completely different to the next. They're just, there's just something about them. I can't. It's so difficult to articulate what it is about trout fishing that just gets me. I know I like the intimacy of it. I like the idea of sitting on a pool and there's a trout just across from you, and every so often you see it rising to take something from the surface. And as you were saying, you play it out in your head and you think, right, well, if I drop my fly in just about there and I let it drift down, I know that it's going to take it, and then we're in business. I think it's one of the reasons that I've never really got into salmon fishing or anything like that, because it's the intimate nature of the trout fishing and dry fly fishing in particular that really appeals to me. So yeah, definitely trout.
Fantastic. Here's something. You used the word specimen trout, but have you noticed that as you've become a more patient angler, you have caught bigger fish as a result of that?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think, as I say, going back to the early days of swinging flies, it's just all you can do is take whatever's in those riffles or whatever at the time. Whereas if you're being patient and you're going out looking, then you're watching and you're seeing these fish, you see them rise. You get to know, over the years, if you fish a particular river or a particular section of the river, you'll get to know certain pools, and you'll have, I'm sure we've all got sort of a nemesis trout. I know I had one this season. I hooked him 3 times, and I've never landed him. So yeah, I'm hoping he's still there next year. But yeah, it's one of those you get to know where they are. You get to, because as you read in the water and you get to understand how the hatch happens and how it unfolds, as you're looking at the water, you think, well, that's your prime location there. If I was a big trout, that'd be my area. So that's the sort of area that you target first. So yeah, I would say definitely, because this year in particular, I've had some really nice fish actually, and it's been a very, very tough year. We haven't had any notable rain since mid-June, really. So the river's been very low towards the end of the season, and it was about the toughest probably I've ever had it. But I think because of the skills I've built up over the years, I can still make the most of it on most occasions. So yeah, I would say definitely if you introduce a bit of patience and you're happy to wait for the right moments and the right fish, then you will find better fish, definitely.
And I think that's one of the advantages, as you have and myself as well, is that being close to the river, like you said earlier, you can pick and choose when you want to fish. So you're actually probably fishing optimum time for little effort for great reward as well. And I know everyone can't do that, but what it does allow you to do is analyze, know the mood of the river, like you said, the times of the hatches and everything else that goes along with that. And it's lucky to be close, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, I'm quite lucky because of work and everything like that. I'm able to fish most days, so it's quite lucky for me. And like I say, I know you know the timings of the hatches, give or take, and you know that if you get yourself on the river and you're prepared, then you're going to have the pick of the day's fishing, really. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, cool. So our conversation where we were just talking the other day was your passion and love for catching grayling on dry flies. And as we're in grayling season, I thought it'd be nice for listeners to get a look inside your process for tackling them. And I wanted to start off with tackle and how you set up. So what sort of rod length, action, line weight, leader length, just to give us an idea of how you're approaching the river.
Yeah. So I mean, it'll depend on the exact location that I'm fishing, but as a general rule of thumb, it'll be something like a 9-foot 4-weight, something like that. So if I fancy using glass on the day, obviously I'll go shorter. It'll be sort of 7.5 or 8 foot, down to a 2-weight really. With the grayling, they anything above £2 in the water that I fish regularly would be pretty incredible. And grayling, they don't have that same fighting spirit that trout have, so you can sort of muscle them in a bit more quickly. So yeah, basically anything from 9 to 7 foot and 2-weight to 4-weight. But as a general rule of thumb, I would say something like an 8 or 9 foot 4-weight is about right. In terms of leader, I use a furled leader for pretty much all of my fishing, so that stays on there. So it'll be, if I'm using the 9-foot rod, it'll be a 5-foot furled leader, and then I'm not scientific about it, but I would say maybe about 6 feet of tippet on the end. I use fluorocarbon, which is a bit contentious. A lot of people don't like fluorocarbon, but for me, it's what I like. I use it for all of my fishing. So I'll put that on. I'll extend that if I feel like I need, if the drift is a bit more tricky. One thing I've found with grayling, they just don't tolerate drag, micro drag in particular. There'll be times where you think, well, that's perfect, that's covered it, that's almost guaranteed. Going back to what you were saying earlier, you see it in your head, and then for some reason it doesn't take it, and you're scratching your head, and it's micro drag 9 times out of 10 is the issue. So yeah, it's quite often what I'll do is I'll introduce a bit of a wiggle in the rod as I'm casting. It was interesting actually. I was at a demonstration recently this summer, and Paul Proctor was there doing a little casting demo, and he talked about this wiggle, and I turned to my mate and said, "I do that. I've been doing that for years," and I suddenly felt really sort of vindicated that it was something that I did naturally. But yeah, it does help because if what you're doing obviously is introducing slack line into your cast, and it just gives you a longer drift. Now, obviously, what you have to consider is that there's more line then to pick up if a fish takes, and grayling can be pretty speedy on the take, so you do quite often have to be very quick. But at the same time, you have to be quick but not too firm, because if you're too firm, you're going to pop the fly out of the soft mouths. So I think it does take a bit of time to get used to. It's, again, as with most things, experience tells you that, how much pressure to apply and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it's the main thing for me is if you can get a drag-free drift, then in terms of fly, they're not overly fussy. What I'll do is I'll approach the river, and you'll find where there's sort of a foam line or a bit of a foam line, something like that, the sort of natural food line in the river. If you head for that, what you'll find is there's a lot of leaves being, obviously falling off the trees this time of year, and on the leaves are, various terrestrial insects that obviously fall into the water with the leaf. So that's what the grayling are eating. So if you can find those kind of areas, you'll almost certainly find rising grayling. And the beauty of dry fly fishing for grayling is that they don't actually need to be rising consistently to be able to catch them on the dry. If I see 1 or 2 rises in a pool, I'll be in there and I'll be fishing, and invariably you'll get, half a dozen or more, because they'll happily come up and take what you're offering. So yeah. In terms of fly, though, I tend to use a size 16 cinnamon sedge. So it's just a little single deer hair wing, and then a cinnamon dubbing body, and then round the front I put a bit more cinnamon dubbing in a dubbing loop around the front, and then brush it out a bit so it's nice and boogie. And I use that for 90% of my grayling dry fly fishing. So it's quite simple, really.
Music to my ears, because we've tried to talk a lot on here with various people about drag and micro drag, and I think that's more important than the pattern, which again you have alluded to there. And again, during these conversations, one of the really cool things is listening to people and how few flies that they actually use. And I think it again shows that ability to overcome the drag is more important to anglers. The more, and that's one of the things I've tried to push throughout these things. Think about the drift and overcoming it, and the wiggle cast is a great one, which, as you beautifully described, as the cast is going out over the water, wiggle the rod from the left to the right, and the bigger the wiggles you put, or the bigger the movement, the bigger the slack will be in the line. So that's a great way to do it. You can reach the line upstream as well, or downstream should you need it, as the line's going out instead of a wiggle. There's all sorts of little bits and pieces that are worth exploring that I think are better than this is the must-have pattern. And I'm down to the last few patterns that I use now. There's just so few that I need, that I think if I can overcome those issues, then that we're actually in the game. So I get the sense with the grayling as well, from what you're saying, that you look in that pool. Does that mean with grayling fishing that you're choosing those times more carefully? And I know we talked off mic a little bit about it, and I was fishing a chalk stream just the other day, and we were just keeping our fingers crossed that we'd see some rising grayling, and we did, and we managed to target them. And it was just the tiniest little window at lunchtime. But I think sometimes when you get some bright sunshine, that heat permeates through, and a little bit later in the day can be good. But do you still apply the patience that you do to rising trout, to grayling, or is that a function of you choosing those times and looking for those windows over winter?
Yeah, for me, it's about choosing the right time. I was speaking to an angler that I respect recently, and he was saying that he finds that the grayling come on later in the afternoon, as you're saying, with the heat permeating through the water. And like I say, I respect him as an angler, and I'm not disputing that. It's just, for me, I haven't found that in my personal experiences. maybe if I was nymph fishing, it may be more of a factor. I'm not sure. But what I've found is that sort of lunchtime, early afternoon, is the best time. So if you go out late morning, there might be one or two moving. As you get through lunchtime and early afternoon, that's when the peak of the action is. But then for me, certainly in my experience on my rivers, I can't speak for everywhere, obviously. But from about 3 o'clock, it just stops, just completely stops all of a sudden, and that's it for the day. So yeah, like I say, I don't know if that's specific to my local rivers or not. But if I'm taking a dry fly rod out, there's no use in arriving any earlier than about 10:30, and there's no use hanging around much past 2:30, 3 o'clock.
I'm thinking about that a little bit about what you said, and I think you're exactly right that it may be down to local rivers. And I think about the rivers, some of them I fish down here, that the prime times really are those September, October, early November for rising grayling, and then I'm probably not even really thinking about them in any meaningful way. And like you said about the conversation you had, and it got me thinking that perhaps it may be one of those days where it is brighter. It may be some position on the river that stops the fish rising, that they don't like it. It's right in their faces. So I guess, like you say, it can come down to the river you're fishing and where you're actually fishing. I wanted to come back to rods because it was interesting that you mentioned glass there. Are you a buyer of glass rods or are you a builder of glass rods?
Both. So yeah, I'm a bit. I mean, aren't we all a bit of a tackle tart? I like my rods. I like my reels. And fiberglass was fairly new to me. I'd used obviously some of the older fiberglass, which I think we can all agree isn't the most fun to use all the time. But then obviously the new S-Glass stuff came out, and I was hearing a lot more people were using it, and I thought, well, I'm gonna have to give this a go because why not? So yeah, I bought myself a couple of different, like a Reddington butter stick, that kind of thing, and then I stumbled through social media. I stumbled across this guy called Mark in Germany, and he was posting pictures of these incredible rods, like the attention to detail and the thread work and everything was just amazing. So I'd had a little bonus from work at the time, and I thought, oh well, let's try one. So I bought one of those, and I just fell in love with it instantly. It was just the action just suited me perfectly. And then I'd been thinking for a few years about building a rod because I'd heard, people I know had built rods, and it's something that I'd always wanted to do, but thought I don't really have the skills to do that. It's a bit technical for me. And someone taught me through the process, and I was quite surprised at how simple it could be. So I bought a kit on eBay, and it was an ugly thing when it was done, but I built it, put it together, and I took it. It must have been this time last year, roughly. And I took it out. Obviously, I'd missed the end of the trout season, but I thought I've got to get a fish, and it was a 7-foot 3-weight glass. So obviously, it was going to be a dry fly rod. So I took it down to the river, and I was just getting used to it casting and that kind of thing. And a grayling came up and took my fly almost before I was ready for it, because I was still just kind of just practicing with it. But I reacted, and I managed to set the hook. yeah, that was a pretty surreal moment. It was like, we've all had that. Most of us have experienced catching a fish on your own fly. But this was another step. It was obviously my own fly, and then it was a rod that I'd built myself, and it just added something to the experience. And the fact that it was glass and it was a softer action, and it had a hell of a bend in it for a half-pound grayling. And then I just kind of thought, well, I enjoyed that, so now I'm going to look at what else can I build. Where else do I have gaps in the armory? The answer is nowhere, obviously. But rather than buy rods that I don't need, I thought, well, I'll start building some. So now here we are a year later, and I've built a dozen rods, and half of them still don't get used. But it's just about getting used to not getting used to, but sort of honing my skills. And it's quite a fun thing to do, because I'm not one of these who can sit for hours tying flies. I'll tie 4 of a pattern, and that's me done. So it's nice to have something like rod building for when the river's flooded, and I can just sit and wrap a few guides on, or glue up a reel seat or whatever. So yeah, it kind of evolved from there. So yeah, most of my glass rods were ones that I've built. I have obviously bought a few, but yeah, they're just fun to use. I think just that feel that you get where even a small fish will give you a bend right down into the grip, and it just enhances the whole experience for me. I just really enjoy fishing with them.
Yeah, I'm with you. I know we've had Sandy Nelson on here talking at length, and so many people, and it makes me think that perhaps there is this. People look at fishing slightly differently now. Perhaps I could be wrong. That it's not about the size of the fish; it's that whole experience, and be it the tackle that goes in with that. Are you sensing that, or am I just sort of picking down a rabbit hole or wormhole that I've disappeared down anyway?
No, I think certainly for me. I mean, again, I think there are people out there who they just want numbers. They just want big fish. I don't think that'll ever change. But yeah, for me, it's about the whole experience of the fishing. I'll go out. My good friend Roger, who I fish with a lot, it's about sharing the day together. We both do a bit of rod building and that kind of stuff. So we'll build a rod, and then we'll say, "Oh, you try this one, I'll try that one," and then we'll go out. And obviously, you remember a big fish. It's memorable. It's good. You're not going to say no to it. But at the same time, if we go out and we have a day fishing and we get one fish each, and it was a half-pound trout, but it was a good day, then that's all that really matters. It's I think maybe if I was younger, or when I was younger, it would have been more about numbers, big fish, because I don't know. Is it maybe that you see that as, oh, look at me, I'm a good angler because I can catch X number of fish. But now the way I see it, if that's your aim, if you're going out to catch bagfuls of fish every time, then really you're missing the point. It's not, for me anyway, that's not really what fly fishing is about. Like I say, if that's how people get their enjoyment, then fine. That's their prerogative. But for me, I would stop. If I was having a day where I'd caught that many fish, I'd get pretty bored pretty quickly, I think, because it's not a challenge. It's about the experience and the challenge of the day, I think.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. And I think it's something to do with maturity as well as you get older. And I think it's time constraints as well, that some people don't have the time to do the sort of fishing. And I'm like you, if I've caught a nice trout, I'll probably snip off and go home, and I quite often do. That's enough to fuel and fill that addiction until the urge comes the next day or the day after to go again. But I look at things slightly different in that sense. But it's interesting again, the glass thing and the growth in that. And I was again just the other day, glass, like you said, when I first used it, it put me off for years and years. I've fished I've only got one glass rod. I've been so close to building one. And I think what's put me off is that first one would be lovely to catch fish on, but I'm probably not going to use it again if I build another one, if that makes sense. And my first glass rod I bought from Nico at Yamami in Holland, and I fished it the other day, and it's an 8'9", and it's a 3-weight, but I put a 2-weight Rio Creek on it. The thing's just unbelievable to fish with, and you think a longer glass rod might be a little bit noodly, but it really isn't. And I was fishing a chalk stream, and we were fishing from the bank, and I was throwing, it wasn't a particularly big river, but I was throwing up to 3.5 mil of tungsten under an indicator without even a problem. And then, like you say, the playing of the fish and the ability to play the fish is, I don't think they're a toy. I don't think they're a high days and holidays. It's a perfectly usable, serviceable bit of kit as well, isn't it? And it seems as though that groundswell really has got going with people, given the conversation we've had, that want to experience the more than just numbers, everything that goes with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's all, it's all part of it. It's about, quite often people will ask me, what rod do you recommend? And for me, it's always, well, you want something that you'll enjoy using, because you hear a lot of, people say, oh, get this rod because it's brilliant. And that's fine. But 9 times out of 10, a lot of people that recommend certain rods have a very, very limited experience with them. They're recommending it because it's what they've got and it's what they use, but they haven't tried the other 1,000 rods that are on the market. So for me, maybe it's a bit cliche, but everyone always says, oh, if you can go and test a rod, do that, and then you'll find what suits you, what you like using. Because there's a lot of rods that have been very highly recommended, get rave reviews, and I've tried them and I've thought, yeah, it's a nice rod, but it's just not for me. So yeah, I think the whole sort of experience of your day is enhanced by enjoying the rod that you're using. Again, it's something that'll sound crazy to someone who doesn't fish, but it is more than just a tool for delivering your fly line. And I think having a rod that you enjoy using just definitely makes the day that little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. And great advice about trying the rod. Again, it's something we always try and get people to think about. If you're able to cast a rod and see if it works for you, what I like, what James likes, what everyone might be completely different. So I think it's really important to, if you can, get a chance to cast these things. Now, I wanted to circle back a little bit. We've talked over an hour now, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned about grayling and sometimes how quickly they take that fly. And what advice would you give? Because one of the other things I think about as well is setting on them, and also how they will follow a fly downstream for a bit and managing to hold your nerve there. What advice would you give someone looking to fish a dry fly and setting on grayling if they're rising and you're able to catch one?
Well, so grayling, yeah, because they're quite free rising, and as you say, they will follow a fly, but also the way they take a fly is very different to how a trout does, because they have that downward mouth, so they'll come up and over on your fly, which is why they have that different rise form that you see. Quite often people talk about seeing the bubbles and that kind of thing. So for me, it'll depend on the size of the fish. Now, okay, you're not always going to know, but generally a bigger grayling, either you'll see it because it's bigger, you see more of it as it's coming up and over, and it almost goes in slow motion, or you can hear. There's one of two ways that a big grayling will take a fly. There's one, it can be really aggressively up and over with quite a lot of splashing, or sometimes it's almost as if they just kind of, almost like a chub takes a dry fly, where they just almost inhale it as on the way past. And they, I think, are the ones generally that have followed the fly downstream a little way. Now, setting, it's a difficult one because quite often you're dictated by where your line is, where what's around you, if you've got trees, things like that. 9 times out of 10, I don't actually put too much thought into the setting of the hook. It's more of an instinct, and I'll try and think about how the fish is taking it, where it's taking it, and then set accordingly. But in practice, it's not always possible. Sometimes it's a case of, oh God, it's taken the fly, quick. I think the key thing is not to try and pull that fish out of the water. If you're too aggressive with it, you will pop the hook 9 times out of 10. You've got to just it's almost a flick of the wrist, just to lift that fly, but be firm with it. And then it's just about keeping that tension. If you make it stick in the first couple of seconds, the chances are it will see the net. But if you're going to lose it, 9 times out of 10 it'll be lost during the take at some point. The other thing to consider is that grayling quite often miss the fly. I assume it's because of the way that they come up and over to take the fly. Quite often they'll misjudge the drift or whatever happens. I unfortunately foul hooked one actually recently, where what he'd obviously done was come up and over, just missed it to the side, and then my fly had lodged into the flank of the fish. Luckily, it was a small fish. I was able to get it straight in and unhook him. But it's definitely something to consider, because there's quite often you'll see a rise near your fly, and 9 times out of 10, if you're not paying attention, you would just instinctively react. But you can see, or I have seen, that my fly still sat there on the water, and it's just a case that it's missed, and that's all it is. And you ripping your fly out of there is going to do more damage than good. So yeah, it's just about, again, that thing that we were talking about, patience, and not being overzealous is the main thing. Not trying to rip that fish out of the water instantly.
Yeah, good tip. Good tip. One of the things I think about, if I'm not hitting them, say I was fishing your cinnamon sedge and I couldn't hit the fish on there, I might think where I position. So I may go in the film a little bit more. So I might have, and it's one of Paul's Proctor's patterns that I talk about a lot, the pearl butt, and that sits in the water column a little bit more, in the surface a little bit more. And I find sometimes it may be psychological, it may be whatever. I can think about, I can set the fish a little bit better then. But, like you say, we often blame ourselves for not hitting the fish, and sometimes it is their fault. So some really good tips there. Now, you live right on a wonderful trout and grayling stream. Do you like to travel, though? Do you like to go a little bit further looking for trout and grayling?
Yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate this year in particular. I've been able to fish some, I've fished on the Itchen, the Froome. I fished the Derbyshire Y, which was pretty cool. The rainbows. So yeah, I do. I'm one of these. I'll go anywhere to fish, pretty much. It's I'm always looking for nice water to fish. The chalk streams is an interesting one because it's something that, being a northerner and an avid freestone angler, I wasn't really sure what I would make of the chalk streams, and I think, given what I'm used to fishing, I don't think I could fish a chalk stream every week. But they are pretty magical places. Just the way that the sort of it sounds crazy, but the way that the water flows through them, and the little meanders that you get through these fields and stuff, they're just perfect waters for dry fly fishing for trout. And I was incredibly fortunate in June I was invited down by Charles Jardine, and we fished the Froome, and we fished it right through the day on mayfly season, and just the sheer amount of spinners in the air was incredible. And we don't, round here, we actually don't get much of a mayfly hatch at all. Certainly on the tees, we get them on the Eden, but the numbers on the Froome I honestly I couldn't believe it. So that was pretty magical, and things like that make me want to obviously explore new waters, because if I can't get that where I fish, I have to get it somewhere else.
Nice. Do you have, on that basis that you're thinking about that, do you have a dream destination? Is there somewhere that is super top of the list for you?
So I wouldn't say I've got a dream that's top of the list, but traveling to, out of the country is something that is on the agenda, has been on the agenda for a while. Were it not for the pandemic, I think it would have certainly happened before now, because I was starting to think more about it around that time. But it's all the usual places. New Zealand obviously is right up there, but there's a lot of places in Europe that I really want to fish. Slovenia is if I was to say, top of my list, I probably would say Slovenia. I think. Just the images that you see from some of the rivers over there it looks pretty amazing. But again, until I've experienced it, I can't say whether it'll be for me or not. But yeah, certainly a lot of places in Europe that I'd very much like to go and explore.
Sometimes there's no place like home, though, is there?
No, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if people want to see what you're up to, rod building, fly tying, fishing, how can they find you? You're on social media?
Yeah, so I just use Instagram really. So it's j.w_fly fishing, I believe. And I basically just use it for I post my day's fishing or a fly that I've tied. That's pretty much it really. It's more of a diary. But yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we chatted well over an hour now, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think really we've only scratched the surface, but I'd like to say, first off, a huge thanks for coming along and talk to me today, and also for the article. I'm really looking forward to putting that out in Fly Culture in coming issues. So thank you for that. And James, it's been great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the article, and I hope other people enjoy the article. It'd be interesting to see, and I'll try and work on some more for you.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to those, and the images that accompanied the piece were absolutely fantastic, and they have whetted my appetite as well. So, everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. I've been talking with James Waine today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As ever, there will be lots more of them down the line, but I hope you're enjoying these. If you are, perhaps you'll consider subscribing to them too. But thanks very much for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.